I've driven a Grand Prix car from every decade. I drove a 1937 Aston Martin the other day, which competed in the 1940s as well. So from the 40s until Lewis's 2019 car, I've driven a car from every decade, which is pretty cool.
Welcome to the Your Data Driven podcast. If you like this podcast, be sure to visit our website at yourdatadriven.com for more useful help and advice on setting up your race car, mastering data analysis, and driving faster. Welcome to episode 30. To celebrate this mini milestone, I'm delighted to welcome ex-Formula One driver and SkyPad analysis guru Karun Chandhok to the show. Karun has almost an encyclopaedic knowledge of motorsports. He's one of only 2 Indian drivers to have ever raced in Formula One and has arguably gone on to make an even greater impact in our sport through his work in the media, with Williams Formula One heritage, and even as a racetrack designer. As possibly the only person on the planet who has driven a Grand Prix car from every decade, in today's show, Karun shares with you his experiences and his best insights on how to get the most from your driving. It's a fascinating show, so as always, sit back, grab a pen, grab a coffee, and let's hear what Karun has to say. Welcome, Karun.
Thank you. Lovely to be here.
Thank you so much for taking the time. I genuinely appreciate it. I know you're juggling about a million different jobs at the moment, backwards and forwards on flights, and doing all this great work. What would be lovely is if we could get a little bit of background on you for the people who may or may not know who you are, and also work towards possibly 1 or 2 takeaways that they could go away and think, I never quite thought of that, or when I was preparing for my race or preparing for my driving, that's a really good tip that I wouldn't have thought of on my own. So how does that sound?
Yeah, sounds good. Sounds like a plan.
Fantastic. So as someone with an encyclopedic knowledge of motorsport, you seem to know the dates and facts and figures of everything. What I'd love to do is start from the beginning from your career. So how did you start and how did you get into racing? I think you've got a bit of a sporty family. I think your dad may have some interest, but maybe you're more on the rallying side. And then how did you get into racing? And how did you get into circuit racing?
You're right in saying it was my family were into it. So my grandfather, my grandmother used to race in the 70s. Oh. My dad started racing in 72, I think. And he raced and rallied at the same time back in India. But the way they competed in India at the time, it wasn't as structured or professionally run as it was in the rest of the world, basically. They almost had a arrive and drive whatever you've got policy. He had a Formula 2 Chevron, which he competed against. Vijay Mallya was in an Ensign Formula 1 car. There were others who were also in F2 cars. And then there was some in Formula 4s. And they were all in this, what they called the open class, where they were all in it together. And they went around the country and raced at all these disused airfields around the country. And he also competed in rallying, Escort Mark II and various other things. And then went on to run a team. I very much grew up in a house surrounded by motorsport and motorsport people and cars. Day-to-day family business was a garage. We ran a workshop. And so I spent a lot of time there with the mechanics and tinkering with cars and probably annoying them a lot because I wanted to help to fit an exhaust bracket or play with the cylinder heads or take out the spark plugs from the engine or just mess around with tools, basically. I love being around cars and messing around with cars. So yeah, that's how I got interested in it. And then I started, we never had any karting in India. So I've never done a go-kart race really in my life.
Yeah, I read somewhere that your first kart you bought when you got into Formula One.
Yeah, that's right. I got a little cadet kart when I was 6. My dad got me a kart as a birthday present. But I never drove it on a track because we had no tracks in India. So I would drive it in between the customers' cars in our garage. And it really used to wind my grandfather up because I'd make the customers' cars park in a way to make a track and create chicanes with them and things like that. It used to really wind my grandfather up. But so, eventually when I got to F1, obviously we had no testing. And so I bought a kart just to drive and keep me sharp. So my first racing was in India when I was 16 in the national championship. We had a class called Formula Maruti, which was with a little 800cc engine, 4-speed gearbox straight out of the road car. Little space frame chassis, like Formula First, but with a bit less power.
Oh, how did that feel for you, getting into a car like that?
Yeah. You're a 16-year-old in high school and you're a racing driver. You think you're Michael Schumacher. But I think I was quite lucky that all the way along the journey between my parents. And I think because I was surrounded by all these other motorsport people, I had my feet on the ground in terms of when you're in it, of course, you're excited, but you also know it's just a step. To me, it was always a step on the ladder to the next part of the journey. It's funny to think it's been 20 years since I last raced in India, which is extraordinary because I only did 1 year of racing in India before I left.
Yeah.
And so, I raced then across Asia in 2001 before coming to the UK. And I moved here in 2002 and never left, basically.
That must have been a big move. This bug of motorsport is in you, so through osmosis almost, and then you've found a passion for it. It's funny you say about the karting, because sometimes I talk to drivers and maybe people who are new to the sport, and they want to go straight to, I don't know, a GT car or something, and you say that karting, and they look down on you. It's for kids or something like that. And I also think it's like actually there's so much value in karting. And I remember watching. Recently, I had George Russell going around. He shared some video of him in a gearbox car going around one of the tracks. And that's a great way to stay fit. Did you find that useful?
Yes, very, very much. So I used to live in Brackley in Northamptonshire. And so Wilton Mill was my sort of local track. And it was a fantastic way to keep fit. I did it for a number of years where I would cycle from my home to the circuit. It was about 40K, get there, drive the kart for a couple of hours. It would properly destroy you. Get back on the bike, pedal back home. So you've done 80K of pedaling, a couple of hours in the car. It's a really intense day of training. And I think there's a lot of value in just driving stuff. If you just need to go back in history and look at the versatility of some of the drivers. You look at your Andretti's and people like Jackie Stewart and people like that, Jim Clark, of course, and they would drive anything. They would literally jump in and out of anything and everything. Jackie, I was talking to him just last week, actually. We're on a call talking about stuff. And he mentioned to me that he remembered a day at Crystal Palace where he raced 4 different categories of cars on the same day. I do that nowadays at Goodwood Revival. Sometimes last year I raced, I think, 3 different cars on the same weekend a couple of years ago. And it's brilliant. Yeah, I just wish I'd done more of that earlier in my career because it unlocks parts of your brain that give you versatility. And it suddenly makes you think about the way you drive, the way you put your steering inputs in, the way you apply the brake or the throttle and you balance the car. And all of a sudden you're having to really think on your feet and adapt to different cars. There was a weekend, I remember 2019, I drove a Can-Am McLaren, which is a beast, 1965 Can-Am McLaren, an AC Cobra, and I think I was also in the Mini that same weekend, which is
front-wheel drive,
front-wheel drive, and it's a proper range of stuff. But it was great, and I think there's something to be said about jumping in and out of stuff, and therefore I've gone a long way around. But I think jumping in and out of a kart or jumping in and out of different cars just makes you a better driver.
So talking about being a better driver, there's a really good video where you interview another former guest of mine, Rob Wilson. Now, Rob, famous, trains all the great and the good of motorsport in a street car and a road car. What's your opinion on what makes a good driver? Because the perception is you've got to just be more heroic. I need to be at the front. To find those last 2 seconds, I've just got to drive the wheels off this thing and be braver. And when I was talking to him, he gave me an impression that wasn't necessarily the case. And you've got this rounded experience from different cars. What is it that you've been able to take from, say, these different vehicles and think, actually, because you drive a lot of historic cars as well with the Williams, to modern contemporary Formula One cars. So you're probably the person who's driven the most variation.
I've driven a Grand Prix car from every decade. I drove a 1937 Aston Martin the other day, which competed in the 1940s as well. So from the 40s until Lewis's 2019 car, I've driven a car from every decade, which is pretty cool.
That is pretty cool.
Listen, I think ultimately, driving a race car is all about driving to the level of grip available. Going flat out down the straight, anybody can do that. That's not the hard bit. Ultimately, being quick and being competitive is about feel. It's about feeling where the level of grip is and where the limit is and where you believe you can lean on the car and the tires up to the point where you're overdriving it and you're sliding. Because, with the historic stuff, for example, that you mentioned, like with a Can-Am car, you can't drive it with pinpoint accuracy that you can with a modern Grand Prix car because of just the level of downforce is different. And they're on rock hard Dunlop tires that I think they do 4 race events on one set of tires. And it's completely different to a modern car. and you have to drive it. It does move around, and it is moving around underneath you, and it does go sideways. But it's about finding that balance of how sideways is okay, and you're still putting the power down and accelerating because you want to keep it in the power band, versus how sideways is too sideways and you're starting to scrub speed and lose speed. Ultimately, any race car, it doesn't matter whether you're a club racer racing in a little VW Golf or racing in a Citroen C1. Ultimately, you're driving to the level of grip that the car can offer you. The concept of you're able to drive 110%, or this phrase that people use, he extracted 110% out of the car. That's nonsense. You can't. By definition, you can only extract 100%. It's similarly the concept of somebody outperforming the car. It's often said, qualifying in F1 even nowadays, you say, oh, so-and-so outperformed the car to qualify up the grid. You can't. Again, by definition, you can't outperform the car. But it's about extracting every ounce of performance from the car and every ounce of potential from the car.
What advice would you give people if they were struggling or they were thinking, right, I'm going round and I'm driving as quick as I can, and someone in the same car as me and they're doing it quicker?
The first thing I would say is you got to park your ego. And actually becoming a sports car driver was very useful for me for that. Because, I climbed up the single-seater ladder, and you're incredibly selfish.
You've done Le Mans, haven't you?
Yeah, I've done Le Mans 5 times, and Sebring, and the World Championship, and European Championship, all sorts, and GT racing and things, but where you share a car with another driver. But prior to that, I climbed the single-seater ladder, where your mindset is to be incredibly selfish and look after yourself first and to try and beat your teammate first, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And actually, then you get to sports cars and you get in it and you do a lap time and your teammate goes quicker than you. And there's nowhere to hide. There's literally nowhere to hide because you have literally climbed out of that seat. Someone else has got in it and gone quicker than you. And at that point, you can go one of two ways. Either you can quickly dig up the book of excuses and find the reasons why they're quicker than you.
We are good at excuses as drivers. I think when it comes naturally, they just flow out, and sometimes you don't even know you're doing it.
Yeah. Or you can show a degree of humility, park the ego, and look to the data, look to the onboard videos, get a driver coach, get the other teammate, the driver who's gone quicker than you, to help you. Because ultimately, actually, you're in it together. And if you're quicker, your teammate's result is better as well. So I think there's a huge element of it. I find it extraordinary that there aren't more driver coaches in motor racing, really, at the highest level. You look at any other sport, whether it's tennis, whether it's cricket, whether it's football, whether it's even MotoGP. Valentino Rossi has a rider coach. And yet there's this bizarre concept in F1 that, and at the highest levels of motor racing, that you can't have a coach because it's somehow seen as a weakness. I think that's nonsense. I think having a driver coach, especially if you're an amateur racer who's just coming into the sport, perhaps you haven't been doing it from a young age, so you haven't got the muscle memory and your senses aren't in tune with it from the age of 8 in go-karts, then having some coach along to help you and just pull you along in the right direction is incredibly valuable.
So I've got a few thoughts on that because I've got a background in engineering and vehicle dynamics and motor racing. And then the last 10 years, I've actually worked in Olympic sports. And my contribution to those teams is helping them get more value from their information, their data. But what's been fascinating to work with these top level coaches is just to see what the definition of coaching is for them, because it's not what I would have assumed coming from motorsports. Because previously I would have gone, it's quite instructional. Whereas they see coaching as much more of a partnership and a kind of, we're going to work this out together and work with you to improve and set your goals and help talk to you through. So there's a lot more of a psychological element to it as well. I think they are coming in motorsports, but traditionally they haven't been there at all.
No, and I think ultimately it's about what that individual needs. You can't generalize it.
But they see it as a performance ad. It's not that you have a problem. It's that if we had some mentor or a better coach, what more can we get from you?
But that's logical though, isn't it? And it's the same way that I think the teams have a tire engineer to tell them how to get the best in the tire, and a gearbox engineer and an aero guy and a vehicle dynamics guy.
Yeah.
You need someone to get the best out of the driver. And that's not about saying, oh, go on that curb or get on that, that bit of tarmac there, or brake here or brake there. It's about the overall concept of think about how you bring the tires up into the right window. Think about how you're approaching your out lap for qualifying. Think about how you're positioning the car on the opening lap. Think about your fuel management or your tire management or energy management if you're doing electric racing nowadays. So it's about just giving the drivers a bit of a holding hand. And you see it in other categories, frankly. I think of people like Dario Franchitti. He works as that in-between person between the drivers and the engineers at Ganassi in the IndyCar program. I think people like Alan McNish have done that for Audi with their Le Mans stuff.
The interesting thing about what you're saying there is that they fit the stereotype, because I think, and again, this might be just my opinion, but there's a worry that who are you to tell me what to do if you can't do it yourself? And I think there's a disconnect there. So a lot of the coaches that I've worked with at an Olympic level are good at their sport, but they never excelled. But they are amazing they will get more from your genetic potential than you ever would on your own. They may not be able to do what you can do as an individual, but they will get more from you than they can. And so there's this disconnect.
But equally, I think engineers who have driven are better engineers.
Agreed.
The best race engineers I've worked with have all done a little bit of racing, even if it's at just club amateur level with their dads or whatever. But at least they can understand your mindset a little bit of what it's like when you don't have the confidence in the car or when something's not working for you. I used to take my engineers karting with me. I used to say, come, let's just go have a day out in the kart together, and we'd have a balance, and I want them to feel the balance. And A, it's a good little bonding exercise, but B, it just gives them a little bit of insight into how you feel in the kart or whatever.
I think it's just only going to help, isn't it? It's just only going to help you. So talking about data and engineering kind of stuff, because you do like this amazing piece on the SkyPad. I genuinely really enjoy it. How do you get those things so quick?
I can't take any credit for it. We have an amazing team of people who work back at Sky, and it does blow my mind, because we'll get towards the end of qualifying. There'll be 2 minutes to go, and I'll say there's a guy, particularly, I got to say, a guy called Damien Giffen, either Anthony Davidson or I will say, Damien, we want to do a Max versus Bottas comparison, sessions ending in 90 seconds, and he'll magically piece it together and it'll appear in the SkyPad. And really? I have no idea how he does it. And he's not the only one. There are several others in that team, but they're extraordinary too.
I was hoping you were going to give us some secret tips, because one of the things, like when you go racing on your own or in a small team, you've got access to some level of data and video, and you want to get better, and you think, actually, I'm going to give this a go. And I actually spend a lot of my time trying to help people in that position, trying to understand it. Maybe they don't have an engineering background. But the elephant in the room with all of that is it just takes a long time, and it's a bit of a hassle when they're trying to have a nice weekend. And it's like, do you want to go and get the laptop out and start looking at squiggly lines and trying to make sense of all of this?
But to me, it's about prioritization, right? For example, I work with Williams Heritage with our clients, and they're very much in that boat. They bought these amazing Formula One cars. They're not looking for the last half second of lap time. They're looking to enjoy themselves and to get quicker and to improve. And they want to do a good job because they're inherently competitive. And so ultimately, I take them out sometimes in Formula 3 car, do a bit of coaching, a bit of training, and I'll drive the car, set a benchmark lap time, they'll jump in it, and we go from there. And when we overlay the data, it's about picking the trends. It's about saying, I very much work about small objectives. It's like, in this session, we are going to improve this corner. Let's pick 3 corners that we're going to improve. Let's not try and do the whole lap. Let's not try and find 3 seconds of lap time here. But in these 3 corners, I want you to brake 10 meters later for that one. I want you to go through that corner 6 kilometers an hour faster. And I want you to pick up the throttle a few meters earlier at the apex for this corner. There we go. That's our 3 objectives for this next run. And then you break it down, run by run. These are our objectives. And eventually, the muscle memory start to build, and you hope that by the end, they'll piece the whole puzzle together. But I think it's so much of it. And you see this with teams, even at the highest level. I remember you'd come from debrief after a run and plug in 15 bits of information for you to do the next run. And you just go, whoa. Let's try and see where our biggest losses are. Let's try and correct those. And even if we're losing half a second in one sector, let's try and bring that down to 0.2 and understand why we're losing it. Is it high speed? Is it slow speed? So much of it is about prioritization of which areas you need to find the biggest amount of lap time and where you're going to gain the most amount of lap time.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I absolutely couldn't agree more. And one of the things that's quite difficult, I see people struggling to do that distillation or that prioritization piece. because you go from not knowing anything about it, and then you go start digging into the data, and then you suddenly go, oh, look, there's all this stuff here, like everywhere. And you're like, oh, let's just throw all that. But that doesn't help, because there's no point in having the quickest car on the laptop, I say. It's like you want the quickest car on the track. So how are we going to go from where we are to reliably be much quicker? And you can see it all. You see all the numbers, but it's putting that into action.
But you also have to factor in so many different things. You have to factor in, is the driver you're talking to tired? Are they fatigued? And I don't mean physically, mentally. Have you overloaded them with so much information through the day? They're not able to respond to the changes. Are they? Sometimes you have to look at it and go, realistically, they're not going to get faster in the high-speed corners because they haven't got the confidence yet, and it'll take time. So don't push them, because all that'll happen is they'll crash and you just destroy their confidence even more. Yeah. So actually push them in the braking zones, or push them in the slow speed or medium speed corners where there's less risk. Build their confidence up that way. So much of it is when you look at what engineers and coaches are trying to do with drivers, I think they sometimes have to just think about who they're dealing with and try and do it in a range that is feasible for the person that you are coaching, for the driver you're coaching.
And I think what's interesting, that sort of segues right nicely back to the word coaching, because it's like, just because the person can understand the data doesn't mean they can coach that individual.
No, yeah, because engineers like a binary world where things are yeses and nos and ones and zeros, and all of a sudden you have this annoying thing known as a racing driver with topics such as confidence and emotions and feelings involved. It completely goes against what engineers, which are data-driven numbers, whereas drivers are subjective.
Yeah, 100%. So one of the things that you've got involved with recently, I think, is circuit design and stuff like that. So how does that segue into the sort of the driving aspect of that?
It doesn't. It's a totally different thing altogether. I've been working with this company called Driven International for about 4 years now. And essentially, it always amazed me how little input drivers had into circuits. And you'd see these new circuits pop up and drivers would drive it and afterwards would say they didn't like it. And the people who built the track will spend millions on it and would go, oh, for God's sake, why do the drivers like it? So, well, if you asked us in the first place, we would have told you.
I just thought, as soon as I found out you were doing that, and it's only recently I found out you were doing it, and it was just like, that's such a genius idea in the sense it's so simple and it's so obvious. It's in the engineering, we put driver in the loop. So we need to put the driver in and get...
Well, that's exactly what we've done. So initially, when we started off, we were looking at, they do the drawings in CAD and I would look at it and I'd offer some comments and we'd make some changes and we were doing it like that. And we need to take this to the next level, where we need to do it in driver and loop. So then we actually have employed a guy who has had previous experience of building tracks for gaming companies in 3D and stuff. Yeah. And he's brilliant. And now he makes track models. I invested in a driver and loop sim in my office. They work remotely out of their office, which we've all had to do for the last 18 months. And now we set up these Zoom calls and do these sessions where we have a very methodical approach. You literally start with a plot of land. They'll sketch out 6-7 different track options. I'll offer my comments and out of those 6 or 7, we'll pick our best 2. Then we'll go into the next level of doing it in CAD. And the 2 will become 1. And eventually we'll pick the best of both and create one track in CAD. Once we're happy in CAD, then we put it into a sim model. And then typically I'll do 2-3 days on the sim in different cars as well.
I was going to ask you exactly about that, because different cars, you can have a different feeling in different cars. Yeah. But you need a fast car.
Yeah, exactly. And you have to, and this is where you have to think about what the client wants, right? I.e. the people building the track. We're doing this track in Hawaii right now, which is about people with their supercars doing track days and their Ferraris and things like that. So there's no point designing a track for single seaters. You need to do the evaluation in road cars, in literally Ferrari track day cars or Porsche GT3 track day cars. And we've got those car models now as well. We've done quite a bit of work. But then equally, we're doing a circuit. We've got one in Canada at the moment, which is a Grade 2 track. So we've been evaluating it in a Formula 2 car. And I'm fortunate that with my relationships with Formula 2, Formula 3, and Formula 1 teams, I'm able to get real car data and correlate my sim car models with their real car models and make sure that the car models are correct and the tire model is correct. So then when we evaluate the new tracks, we know that the cars are correct and therefore we can evaluate the tracks properly. And what we found ever since we started doing the driver and loop, it's amazing actually how I'd like to think that every track that we've done, probably 2 years, there have been at least 3 or 4 corners we've changed or modified after we did the sim sessions, because it just doesn't feel...
What is it? Is it just like awkward or flow or just...
It's everything, right? It changes. Sometimes you want a track that just has a bit more width. Sometimes you want a corner that has a bit more width. Sometimes it's about opening the radius. Sometimes it's about putting camber in it so you get a better flow through the corner. Sometimes you want to create an overtaking zone, or you've created an overtaking zone and you think actually it's not a very good one, so we need to do something else at the previous corner or the previous straight to make it better. There's a whole range of things, and safety is a big thing as well. What we now do is we place all the barriers, and sometimes there'll be points where I'll come out of a corner, I'll circuit and go, say what boys, the angle of that barrier doesn't look right to me. If I had a shunt there, that angle doesn't look right. And actually, despite the fact that it would pass the FIA homologation, we actually can make it better. And we've done that on a couple of occasions. We've been very lucky. We've been working with Abu Dhabi on their redesign now. That's our latest thing we've done for the last few months, which has been great, very interesting. Tough because you're limited, or there's an existing track on an existing island. So you can't move the hotel, for example, and do what you want. You have to do stuff within certain parameters, which is difficult. And you have to hit cost targets. I can't just design my dream track every single time. You have to design... Some tracks you only have 50, 60 acres of land. Sometimes you have 300 acres of land. So you have to design it accordingly. No, it's really interesting. I'm lucky that at my last count, I'm up to 86 tracks that I've driven on, not counting the ones I've visited or seen doing TV stuff. So I've driven on a lot of different racetracks. I've in a lot of different cars. And I'm able to draw into that experience. I look at things and say, why don't we make this hairpin like the hairpin at Oulton Park, or why don't we do this chicane Ascari at Monza, or why don't we do stuff like that? It's been really useful.
Yeah, I've driven on a much smaller number, but in the virtual world and sim racing world, probably driven on that many different things. Is that something you do with it? You've got a rig there. I mean, do you do a bit of sim racing as well? Or?
Yeah, we have a nice little Tuesday night, Wednesday night sim group. Oh, yeah, it's really good fun. We don't stream it. We don't put it online. None of this Twitch, all this stuff. It's just, there's about 15, 18 of us, all from the racing world, other racing drivers and just friends. And there's plenty of banter, lots of abuse, and just, we call it our boys' night in. So we've been Darren Turner, who runs Pace Performance. He's the ringleader and organizes these nights. And every week, somebody picks a different car and track combination. And away we go. We raced Skip Barber cars at Mid-Ohio the other day. We raced Legends at Oulton Park, Mazda MX-5s at Sebring. We just pick and choose. We've done all sorts. We've done some crappy old road cars around Laguna Seca a couple of weeks ago, which was hilarious. So it's just quite good fun.
What's your opinion on relating that sim experience to a real world experience? Because it's something that seems to crop up quite often. And again, there's a lot of people in club amateur motorsport in the real world who look down on sim racing. And then there's other people in the sim world who go, actually, the only reason I'm not racing a real car is because I can't afford it, but I can afford this rig, and I'll be just as good. So where do you see those two? I think it's great because everyone's driving, myself, but where do you see that overlap, if there is any?
I think there is, but you have to respect the fact that there's no fear factor in the sim world. And that's why there's a dangerous game of people who think they're good on a sim, can get on a racetrack, and then end up having some massive shunts. I think there's certainly merit in you learning a lot of technique, learning the tracks. There's certainly building up muscle memory into how you put various inputs in to the sim. But it's funny, to be quick on the sim, you have to drive in quite a unique way. You look at these sim guys, these Brendan Lees and Mike Epps and all these kids who they're amazing. We can't get within seconds of them on the sim. They're incredible. But when I watch the way they drive and then watch their steering inputs and sometimes even the lines they take, I just look at it and go, you can't do that in a real car. Yeah. You just cannot. You can't drive a real car that way. So that's why we have our own little sim group of racing drivers who we drive like how we drive a race car on the sim. And so we're all 2-3 seconds off the sim kids. But it doesn't matter because we're all in the same group. I think that's where the difference is. Listen, with enough practice, you can all be decent at something. And I think I ran the GT Academy program, for example, for Nissan in India, the game and racer thing. So I ran that for them for 3 years, and we had a bunch of kids come through it and go racing. But that program, for example, the likes of Jan Mardenborough and Lucas Ordonez who came through it, they're very good racing drivers. But they're racing drivers. They came out of the sim stuff. That gave them the opportunity, that opened the door. But then Nissan did a great job at that time at giving them a whole load of real life experiences under the radar. They went and did a whole bunch of club racing to get their licenses. They had to get grade C, grade B, things like that. So they did an awful lot of real life racing, which all went under the radar and wasn't publicized, to give them that experience, which is massively important.
Yeah, it's fascinating. It's a lovely thing that it exists. And I love sim racing. It's funny you say about having a laugh. And we've had a similar thing going in lockdown with some of the guys I race with. And yeah, again, just a closed group between us. But the difference is we can all chat to each other, which is hilarious.
Yeah, exactly. We're all on Discord and you're all just having fun with it, but not for the outside world. So it's great. There's low stress, low pressure. We don't care. We throw random safety cars whenever we want, and it's all just we'll have a last lap safety car, dash to the line, so the guy who's winning suddenly is 15th and all sorts of stuff. So it's quite good fun.
Given the fact that you've driven a Formula One car in every decade, what is it that we can learn from that? Because you do the Williams heritage stuff, you see drivers who are not professional. What is it that you also see, or you may have seen, that's a kind of common trait across those kind of drivers? You think, you know what, it would be really good if people did X.
I think the first thing is people need to be clear in their own mind of what they want out of it. Why are they doing it? Are they doing it just to have fun? And in which case, they're just there to participate and they don't care whether they come in the top 5, or do they care whether they come last, or they want to be first? Have a clear objective of what you want. If you want to win, if you want to be at the front, then you have to invest time and effort and energy and money and a combination of all of the above to make it happen. So I think that's the first thing, is people need to be clear what they want out of that driving experience. And the second thing, as I mentioned before, is there's an awful lot to learn. Even today, Max Verstappen and Lewis Hamilton are learning. They're the drivers on the planet. They're still learning.
I'll pick up on that. It's about constantly learning, and even the best are constantly learning. But you might get stuck on a plateau. How do I break through that and get to that next level? Have you found yourself in that position before?
Yeah, you often do. I've had race weekends, but I remember one particular one at Silverstone in Formula 3. It was awful. We put on 5 sets of tyres, and on every set of tyres, we changed the setup. I tried different things. Whatever we did on all 5 sets of tyres, I did a 1:16.1. I did exactly the same lap time across 2 days on 5 different sets of tyres, different track conditions. And it was just really annoying. You're just banging your head against a brick wall. It's tough. And sometimes at those moments, you have to walk away and spend a few days in between races just trying to understand why that was and what went wrong. And sometimes you will come out with no answers, and it destroys your confidence, and it'll take a long time to rebuild it. And truth be told, that's what happened to me. It took me a long time to rebuild confidence in myself after weekends like that. It is, I don't think it's as annoying, or it can be as annoying as golf, because I think you can find an answer more easily. I don't play golf myself, but I know a lot of people who do, who say sometimes you just go and you're having a terrible round and all you do is try harder and you just play worse. And actually at that point, you just need to walk away and come back another day. I don't think it's as random as that in motor racing, because you normally do find an answer. It's somewhere in the car or yourself or the tires or something, you will find an answer. But yeah, the only thing you can do is to try and go about it methodically and try. And if nothing else works, stick it on the driver in the car and see what they can do. Because if the other driver gets in and suddenly goes half a second quicker, then you know where the problem lies.
Yeah, a lot of people do that, and I think that's a great idea. It would be a bit humbling at times.
The way I keep coming back to, you got to park your ego. You have to sometimes I ran a race team. I ran my dad's race team for him for a few years when I was, living back there and going back and forth. And there was one year, I think it was 2006, we had quite a big team. We were running 15 cars in 3 different categories. So it was quite a big team. And quite often the drivers would be complaining about this, that, and the other. But I would just put my helmet on, jump in the car and do a lap time that they then had to try and match. And I'd answered a lot of the questions. But you can't always do that. You can't just jump in someone's car at a race weekend. So it's not an easy answer, really. But I would say just try and find a methodical way to find it. The worst thing you can do is to blame someone else. My method And I learned this, I have to say, from David Brabham, who was my teammate at Le Mans the first year I did it, is to always look to yourself. If things go wrong, always first look at yourself. What could I have done better? Even if it means you're caught up in a first lap accident and this and the other happened. The first thing you know to think about is, oh, not just chopped me off and broke my front wing. I really should have qualified better, then I wouldn't have been in that mess in the midfield. And why didn't I do that? And et cetera, et cetera. So I think, it's an invaluable lesson I learned from David, which is you first look at yourself and then look at all the other factors.
Yeah, that's a really good point, actually. And that sort of idea of it's too easy to look for the external stuff. He's chopped into me or whatever, but someone might say to you, oh, you were there too. Yeah. Someone else may not have been there, or they might have backed out.
And this nonsense of was cheating. That's the favorite one, is the other guy's winning because he's cheating. Yeah, it might be true, and they might be cheating, but have you, first of all, looked into all the stuff that you're doing first before you look into that?
I just want to say thank you very much. I'm aware of your time, and we haven't even talked about your Motorsports UK stuff.
It's a really interesting project for me. Obviously, Motorsport UK is one of the most historic ASNs and arms of the FIA, and the UK is still one of the key countries for motorsport globally in terms of where teams are based, where drivers come to further their careers, and just the breadth of the sport that exists here. It's interesting for me to join an organization which has genuine ability and influence in the world of the sport that I love, and to see if I can contribute something from my own experience and share some thoughts and ideas on the direction of the future of the sport. There's so many things going on. What should be the single-seater ladder for kids starting up? What should that look like in terms of what cars they should use, what tires, what engines, what chassis? What about karting? Why is karting so expensive? Is there a way we can make it more affordable? It has to be, because it's ridiculous how expensive. And also, just how do we go out there and make sure that grassroots racing is still appealing and fun to people? And we want people who are fans who don't have ambitions or, frankly, the money to make it to Formula One, but they should still enjoy the sport because they are the fans of our sport. And without the fan base, the sport doesn't function. I'm going to go and learn a bit more about grassroots racing and understand a bit more of what's out there, because my career has been down the sort of professional ladder, if you like. I've entered myself into a kart cross event in August just to go see what that's all about. Yeah, I'm going to do it at Bishop Stratton. I don't know where it is. But I'm gonna go do some kart cross racing in August for a bit of fun, and just so I can learn and engage with that community and see what that's like. And yeah, I think it should be fun.
I suppose from a club racing point of view, that's something I've got some experience of, and it is different. It's a different mindset to professional motorsports world. There's no less competitiveness, I would say. I think people want to win, they want to go and have fun, but the social side is a big aspect as well. So we do our fighting on the track and then afterwards. And I hope you find that kind of atmosphere. I'm one of the few people I know in my peer group outside of the people I race with who are really into motorsports. And if I'm any representation of that, then that's a kind of a vulnerable position for motorsports in a way. When I grew up, we had people like Murray Walker, who was commentating on the Formula One, but then the next programme he was commentating on the touring cars, and he was commentating on some Formula Ford race with the same enthusiasm, that same passion and drive. I just felt drawn to it. It was amazing. So that exposure and that awareness, as well as bringing some of the costs down.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, there's a lot of things to do. It's about, again, prioritization of what is achievable and what's realistic in the world and what makes sense. Yeah.
I want to wish you all the best for that and everything else that you've got on your plate at the moment.
Thank you very much.
Look, thank you for coming on.
My pleasure. Good to chat.
What an absolute honour to have Karun on the show. I hope you're able to get new perspectives and ideas for getting more from your motorsports. Perhaps you will think more about coaching, how to better use a sim rig, or think of ways to try and get yourself out on track in more of a variety of machinery to try and develop your driving. Karun's passion for our sport is absolute, and hopefully you found it as inspiring to listen to as I did to talk with him. You may know that at the end of season 1, I wrote the Motorsports Playbook, a summary distilling the first 20 shows into nuggets of wisdom. I made the notes so that you don't have to. If you've not got it yet, go and grab yourself a copy from the website. If you like this episode, be sure to subscribe to the podcast and visit us at yourdatadriven.com.